So welcome everyone. It is indeed my pleasure to kick off our first hosted MI Colloquium for spring 2022 with a great, exciting, somewhat unusual topic for us because we do delve into data science, which we're going to be doing next time around. But tonight we're talking about what is a graphic novel. So a conversation about evaluating, purchasing, publishing, and creating graphic novels. So my name is Connie Pascal. I'm giving the welcome right now. And I'm going to introduce you to both our host, who's going to then introduce you to our guest speaker. And then they, Gina and Marc, are going to engage in scintillating conversation. We're going to take audience Q&A. We're going to have some closing remarks, and then we're going to close out the formal part of this presentation. But we are going to stay on 15, 20 minutes afterwards just to have a little community. So I'd like to start out by saying, again, a video for this will be available in 1 week on the MI playlist on the RUCOM YouTube channel. We have 40 other titles there of other colloquium we've done in the past, including one that Marc did, 2 or 3 years ago, 2 or 3 semesters ago about Beyond the Book List, which is very popular. You can take a look at that. We will try and keep you on mute during the presentation, which is when Marc and Gina will be talking, but we do really encourage you to, let it go, let it all out in chat and really engage with each other and share that. Do put your questions in the chat and we'll go from there. So without further ado, I'd like to officially welcome Dr. Marc Aronson to our stage. He is an associate professor of professional practice in our LIS department at Sky. And Marc is an author, professor, speaker, editor, and publisher who believes that young people, especially preteens and teenagers, are smart, passionate, and capable of engaging with interesting ideas and in interesting ways. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and take it away, Marc.
All right. Well, thank you, Connie, for letting us do this. And especially thank you, Gina, for being here. I'm going to tell, before I give bio, a little background to how this came about, which is that last year when I was teaching the YA class, the last unit more or less is always on sort of sex and sex ed and how we should talk about it. And one of my students brought to my attention a graphic novel called Let's Talk About It, which I thought I had some objections to, but more or less I thought was so lively, so fresh, so wonderful use of the medium. And then I discovered that Gina had actually been responsible for creating it. And I had invited her to come speak to my class this year, the children's class, and the international class. But then I thought she had so much to offer that it really wouldn't be fair to just have my students get to meet her. And so I asked Connie if we could have this, colloquium, and Gina said yes. So here's the thing. Yes, she is a force of nature. But also Gina has worked in many aspects of publishing related to graphic novels, from working at First Second, an imprint at Macmillan that I deeply, deeply admire in their approach to graphic novels, to actually creating the graphic novels imprint within Penguin Random House, within their children's division, and therefore yes, let's talk about it. And so I think that you have here a person who knows graphic novels from the inside, how they're created, who knows graphic novel publishing, how they're marketed and sold and edited and evaluated, and who knows how libraries, school and public libraries, work with graphic novels and also where they stumble. And so I think you have here a person who has so much to say. Gina has this spectacular PowerPoint that she's going to be sharing with you. And I think you'll discover that literally every section within it could be a colloquium of its own. So let's start out, Gina. Well, I don't know if you want to say any opening thing other than that you got everyone to tell you about what they're reading. I think Gina's going to begin a little bit with talking about the process within a graphic novel of what's going on in what even is this entity and how does it take shape.
Yeah, well, thank you all for having me, and Connie, Mark, Rutgers, thank you for having me come, and thank you for thinking graphic novels are awesome and important enough that you're doing a whole colloquium on them. That's great. Um, you know, I think, Mark, even before we kind of start talking about parts of graphic novels and how to talk about graphic novels, we talked about kind of just starting off with a quick introduction from me about the various things I've done in publishing.
Sure.
So I can start. So I am a huge graphic novel reader. I have worked in graphic novel publishing most of my whole career, but I didn't read graphic novels until I was in college. And that's because I grew up in a small town in New England, and the local library, the local bookstore, neither of them had graphic novels on the shelf. So, this was in Connecticut, in a small town. So, when I eventually got into graphic novels, I kind of triangulated where I would need to go to find a graphic novel to read. And I'm coming home from college and looking around and being like, oh well, I guess I could drive 40 minutes to the comic store to get a graphic novel, to kind of stumble upon this. And this is a story that's really about access, and the changes that we've had in graphic novel access over the past decade and a half. Because when I was growing up and when I was in college, most bookstores and libraries that I saw or that I went into didn't have a graphic novel section, didn't carry graphic novels. If they did carry a graphic novel, it was maybe Mouse, which I saw some of you in the chat were reading, which is a great book and deserves to be in all of these places. But now here in 2022, that has really changed. And instead of their bookstores, libraries being like, we don't have a section, we don't know how to categorize this, we don't know how to buy this, we don't know how to shelve this. Graphic novels have become broadly adapted in libraries and bookstores and in school libraries all across the US. And that's amazing, and it's amazing change. And I think there's also so much potential for that to continue and grow, with graphic novel publishers publishing more graphic novels, and with teachers and librarians and booksellers realizing that graphic novels exist and they're awesome, going from starting to a collection to making a strong, vibrant, and continually maintained and continually growing collection for their readership, as they grow a readership of graphic novels in the community that they're in. Following, not reading graphic novels as a kid when I was growing up, I read them in college, because my college had a graphic novel library. And then I went from there to working in publishing. So I worked at First Second Books, which some of you know because you're shouting out books like Ryan Andrews' This Is Our Pact, and Mariko Tamaki and Rosemary Valero O'Connell's Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, and Ngozi Okazu's Check Please, which are all amazing. And then after First Second, I went over to work at Random House and built a kids and YA graphic novel imprint for them, where I worked on books like The Magic Fish, which I saw someone else shouted out, and Marc's favorite, Let's Talk About It by Erica Moen and Matthew Nolan. So that was a really interesting was a really interesting project. And most recently, and this is maybe even like since I last talked to Connie, I have become the director of the Boston Book Festival. So I'm
Cool.
so I'm working in a new position where it's kind of the inverse of publishing, where my job is to be a book advocate and get books to readers all around the greater Boston area, all around Massachusetts. So I started there earlier this year, and it is a new and other interesting way of getting not only graphic novels, but kind of all books everywhere. Thanks for
Cool.
sharing that screen, Connie. Okay, so Mark, you were saying.
Well, I was just giving a segue. I'm sorry I didn't give that segue, but the segue to the first part of your PowerPoint, where you will sort of take us, because I think, let's even pause for a second. Obviously, most people who are here could identify and define a graphic novel. But there is a question: what is a graphic novel? Where do comics stop, or do they? And where does, I don't know what, Shakespeare begin, except wait, that's a graphic novel. So for your purposes, what's a graphic novel?
Yeah, so I define graphic novels in a very commercially oriented way, which is a way to define graphic novels. I don't know that it's the best way to define graphic novels, but I define graphic novels as the material that's in comics format, that's in a book sort of shape, that has a spine, and that has an ISBN on the back. So, and I say that's very commercial because for many libraries, and it's even stronger than many libraries, it's most libraries, for most schools, for most bookstores, that's what you need to have a book on the shelf. And that's not always true, right? Like, there's plenty of libraries who have zine collections. There's plenty of libraries who subscribe to monthly comics pamphlets and put them out on, spinner racks as kind of a more disposable book consuming experience than like a novel or a graphic novel. But and all of those things are so great, and definitely it is. It's hard, but it is hard to say, like, if you are in a traditional library or a traditional school library that's not like an academic library or an archival library, having like a zine collection that you have cataloged, that you have to kind of invent all the infrastructure for, is complicated. And depending on the community, it might not work for you. So my graphic novel definition is really aimed at, like, can you buy this book in all of the places that you can possibly buy any other book?
We're actually going to have a talk tomorrow on zine collections in libraries, so it overlaps pretty directly. But anyway, I took you aside. I'd like you now to lead us into your PowerPoint.
Okay. So the first thing that, okay, let me share the screen, and okay, let me just make sure that this is registering properly, and then I will share it.
By the way, there was a note as you were doing it that someone mentioned comics and graphic novels are sequential art. That's Scott McCloud's definition, and certainly one could use.
Yeah.
Sharing now, Gina.
Yes.
There you
Okay.
go.
I think you should all be able to see this now.
We can.
Okay, so when Mark and I started talking about this talk, one of the things that we kind of started talking about was this idea that graphic novels are awesome, and that we love them, and it's great to have them in libraries. And we kind of, everyone coming to a graphic novel talk probably agrees on this. You can let us know in the chat if you still think that graphic novels are any good, but like, Mark and I, I'm sure, can hold up like a Newbery Award winner and a Caldecott Honor book and a Prince Award winner at you, and then you'll just have to kind of like bow down in the face of these winners. Oh, and a National Book Award winner too, because March won the National Book Award. So like, I don't know that in the library space at this point that there's much of a especially in the kids library space, that there's much of an argument of, are graphic novels any good? But having this, okay, now we've decided that graphic novels are good, there's still this complicated part of things where many of us, including me, did not grow up reading graphic novels, did not, write papers about them in English class or history class or art class, work with people who may be older and don't necessarily have comics as part of their vocabulary, and are looking at them and saying, explain to me why we should have this in our library, or explain to me why it's okay to give this book to my kid. Explain to me why graphic novels are books and not some other sort of reading, and why this is an important part of the reading experience. And one of the things that I think can help with that is kind of going back to the basics and thinking about just process and terminology, because the more we can unpack graphic novels for people and kind of go into the details of them, the easier it is for people to understand how they are good. And I have myself talked to teachers and librarians and parents who, when I explain to them something like a graphic novel has characters, or a plot or symbolism, like all of those things, those parts of storytelling that you talk about when you talk about novels and nonfiction, are able to, like, a switch clicks for them, because they're kind of like, otherwise I saw graphic novels as this inapproachable block. Like, it's so exciting, there's art in it, but like, where is the next part that I talk about it? But in fact, graphic novels have all these different parts, and many of which are the same as prose, with characters and plot and themes and symbolism and all of that sort of thing, but also some other specific stuff. So I'm just going to go through a kind of rudimentary, I kind of tore through parts of the graphic novel process and parts of different things graphic novels do. So a first part is a script. Depending on how authors do their creative process, oftentimes they'll kind of write out the text beforehand. And next part from that is thumbnails. And this is a fun thing that you can do as an activity, especially with kids and teens, of just making thumbnails to kind of do here's how you turn a story into a comics format. But this is a very rough outline of where are the things going to be, where is the text, how does this turn from words into words and pictures. Something else that you can think about and talk about in graphic novels is this question of how much text, because you can both have people saying multiple things in every panel, and also completely quiet panels. And that's something an author thinks about as they write, you know, where are the moments when it's quiet, and when are the moments when many things are happening. This page is from The Magic Fish, which I know someone called out before. Just a quick vocabulary thing. Probably you all know this. Panels are the, you know, we've got them right here. Those are the parts that the art and the text are in. Pages tend to be made out of sequential panels. You've got spreads in graphic novels, just like you've got them in picture books. They're very much a pacing thing when you have an exciting moment, when you want to slow down the reader. Another thing you probably all know, a lot of the text in graphic novels is spoken text by the characters and is in word balloons, like this one at the top of the page where Aster here is calling for her mom, who is distracted by science. And text boxes, like this yellow one at the top of the page, is another device that you have in graphic novels where sometimes it's a narration, sometimes it's a note about time indication, like this one where it's just saying meanwhile. And of course you have action. So, you know, you have some moments that are full of text and some moments that are filled with, you know, characters getting out there and climbing things and jumping and all of those things. You know, something else that I think is really interesting to think about when you're reading graphic novels and talking about different elements in graphic novels and what they mean and how they come across is the expressions on characters' faces. And, you know, the authors put so much time and thought into those and really can convey so many feelings. And this slide, and I think the next few, are an iteration of another part of comic storytelling, which is one of my favorite parts, where one of the things that you can do in comics is make the text and the art agree. You know, so the text and the art are saying the exact same thing. And the other thing that you can do is make the text and the art say entirely different things. So, you know, here you have Jen, who's, you know, following her mom down the stairs, but at the same time you have this sigh that she is emitting that we can see and that probably her mom can't see. You know, so there you can read the text, but this is kind of an example of how reading the text and reading the pictures has to happen in concert. You know, here is where we have a character who is doing the exact same thing that he says he is doing. And you know, here we have another iteration of that where we have Calla, who has an apple head, who is like, I suppose I think of something. And at the same time, you can tell that she does not think that she is going to think of something. Okay, so that's my like.
I just wanted
terms and thinking.
Gina, just one thing I noticed, and I loved watching that, is that back to when you were saying about explaining about graphic novels, there is so much visual and especially design literacy involved. Graphic novel readers may not even know they have it, but the way in which design narrates is so fundamental to graphic novels that I think, and it goes down so easy, you don't even notice it. If you're literate in it, you absorb that. But I think it's such a gift to readers, this design, visual narrative literacy that comes as you explore graphic novels.
Yeah, definitely. And, for school librarians and, academic librarians, I think it's a great opportunity to partner with your art department. I think oftentimes that the English department seems like the automatic partner for a library space. But there are so many books with art in them, especially graphic novels, and an art teacher will definitely be able to talk about all of these different elements of visual literacy and art style with students as well.
Onward.
Yeah, okay, so next segment of this presentation, and Mark, I hope you'll ask me some questions here as we go along, is the graphic novel marketplace. Because, we started talking out about, graphic novels specifically, like the actual books, reading them, talking about them as books. But then there's also graphic novel publishing, and graphic novel sales and what's going on in that space right now. So the first chart I have for you is a graphic that's by a PhD student named Kei Sohini, who is awesome, and has made this excellent chart of comics history from 2020. Which, this is actually a thing that if your library director is like, graphic novels, why? Is a thing you can hold up, because there's so many amazing moments that are on here, from Prince Award winners to National Book Award winners to MacArthur Fellowship to amazing book sales. But the main thing that this chart shows is just that sales, and therefore popular acceptance, popular readership, and popular knowledge about graphic novels has been going up very consistently since the beginning of the century. And this chart shows BookScan recorded sales. So this is sales through the register. It's not school and library sales. It's like sales to actual humans on the street who are reading books, not, bulk buys and things like that. Shows that Scholastic is selling a lot of books. Kids' graphic novels are extremely popular, especially Dogman, which I saw that some of you are reading with kids. But also that the graphic novel marketplace is not just one or two publishers who are 95% of this list. There are a lot of different players in this marketplace who are doing a lot of different things. And then the other thing that I see when I look at this chart is that a lot of times when people think about comics, they think about superheroes, especially in the US. DC, Marvel, they're in the movie theater, they're in immediate association with what was the first comic that you read for a lot of adults out there, including me. But I also find it very interesting to look at this chart and see that superheroes are not represented like that on this chart. They are not even dominating this chart the way that Scholastic is. Instead you have Andrews McMeel, who's publishing webcomics collections, and Image, who's publishing creator-owned books, and Random House, who's publishing Persepolis, and all people who are doing very different things, who are on this chart in as major a way as DC and Marvel are.
So let me ask you a quick question. I'm sorry to interrupt, Gina, but are there publishers that students here who are librarians who have or will have budgets should be aware of who aren't represented here? Are there?
I think that's a great question. And in fact, okay, here we go. This is one of my favorite charts. It's a little old because it's from 2018, but it is nonetheless an excellent chart. I unfortunately did not make it, but it's very good. So I think that this is a very valuable chart as far as outlining who all is out there. So if you take a look at this, it's kind of a lot at once, but it's outlining the comics publishing landscape. And you've got different little, cubes in here, little segments for book publishers making graphic novels, for superhero publishers, for literary publishers, for super indie publishers whose books sometimes may not have ISBNs, but are still awesome if your library can support that, for manga, for genre publishers, dedicated kids publishers. And I think that depending on what you are doing with your library, the people on this list are great people to have on your mind when you're thinking about graphic novels.
And that's, I really, folks, I really hope you will look at this and keep in mind, those of you who are in a position to order books, the wide variety of sources to be aware of that are producing really interesting creations. But back to you, Gina.
Yeah, no, and Mark, I think that's great to call out, because comics are a space where, because they've only recently moved into the mainstream big five publishers, there are a whole lot of very small houses, very small setups that are making amazing graphic novels. And, I think looking at this list, if you're interested in literary graphic novels, Drawn and Quarterly and Fantagraphics are just, they're at the top of the list, and they're both indie houses that have fewer than 15 staff people there. So some of the expectations that we might have about where do the best books come from in publishing in comics are a little bit on their head, because so many of the indie presses out there are the ones who've been doing this work for years and years.
So Connie is reminding me that we need to move on. I apologize, but next.
Next, okay, book banning. Mark, you had some thoughts about this that you wanted to start off with. Book banning.
Well, I think one issue about graphic novels and book banning is that graphic novels are visual. So and on the one hand, they are very approachable. They're very easy to read. So comprehension is not an issue. But on the other hand, they may be explicit using, that's my dog barking in the background. They may be directly expressive, as my dog is being.
It's very expressive.
Yes, my dog is being expressive, so I'm sorry I have to stop mid-question, put her downstairs and lead to you. But the point is, it leads.
It's a cartoon dog, right, Mark? Sorry.
Yes. It leads to challenges and book challenges, because a parent who's never, or an objector, yes, as Joyce said, can find a page out of context. I will be right back.
Yeah, so as Mark points out, that can be very easy. It's easy to look at a graphic novel and see violence, and to see queer identities, to see people of color on the page in a way that you can't if you're facing a wall of text. I think another reason that graphic novels are particularly facing this challenge is, adults aren't used to reading them because they didn't read them growing up. And so they don't have those skills of visual literacy and how to talk about these things. And they're kind of like, how do I wrap my mind around this? And then the other thing is just like, graphic novels are popular. They are being banned more now than they were before because people are reading them. And while I am glad that they're finding their way into new readers and new schools and libraries, one of the ways to stop book banning is make sure that all those teachers and librarians and booksellers who are working with them are able to talk about them and talk about them well to kids and parents, so that they all have the tools for understanding this visual reading experience. Also, Melissa, that's terrible. I can't believe that people return graphic novels to you with pages covered up or have tape over things.
That's book defacing.
Yes. Okay, so some more banned and challenged graphic novels. These are the most banned and challenged graphic novels of last year from the ALA. And this is kind of holding true in banned books everywhere, but books with queer characters, books with BIPOC characters, they are really being hit by challenges and bans all over the place, and it is holding true in the graphic novel space, especially now. I mean, and you look at this and you can see how many queer and BIPOC characters this is. And then the next slide is the historical bans. Historical bans on graphic novels. And, historically it has been, partially about sex and partially about violence, and also about queer and BIPOC characters, but it has much more been about sex and violence than it has been in the past, 2 or 3 or 5 years.
I think that actually suggests some kind of outreach that could be done, and education that could be done for parents who may not have read graphic novels, and to talk about what they offer and where something that they might find disturbing fits within a graphic novel. But that's another issue. Let's move on.
Yeah. Okay, so new segment. Authors.
I wanted Gina to talk about some of the authors and illustrators, creators she admires, and some of the types.
Yeah. Okay, so I made some slides. And so all of these just have kind of a collection of graphic novels from different authors, and that are, in some certain categories. So you can probably tell this, this slide is the manga slide. And I think manga is amazing. Probably all of you know, manga is the Japanese word for comics. So these are graphic novels that have been translated from Japanese and are published in the US. And I think the best selling and most popular of these categories are books for young teenagers that are in an action adventure or a kind of romance sort of category. But there's manga of all different sort of kinds. Master Keaton, which is taking up a large amount of this slide, is a manga about an investigative archaeologist, and I think that's awesome. So most of the publishing in the US is kind of focused on those kind of like young action adventure romance books, but there's all this other stuff that is published less frequently by many large and independent publishers. So these are some of them that I think are particularly interesting. Marc, did you have any thoughts about manga? Did you want to?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. The question that comes up among my students often about manga is the fact that you have these very, very long series, and both from a financial point of view of the library needing to keep buying them, and from a shelving point of view as to where to put the 90 plus books. I had wondered on your thoughts, because sometimes my students will say to me, we hesitate to get started in a series if we know we're sort of committing to such a long haul and that we're not sure where we can put them. And I wondered what your thoughts were about that.
Yeah. Okay. So two things. And one of the things is that some of those kids in YA action adventure romance series are many, many volumes long. But in fact, a lot of manga are not that extensive of series. You look at this slide and like Tekken Concrete literally says all in one on it. Heart of Thomas is also a standalone book. So is My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness. Ping Pong has 2 volumes. There are these series that are so many books, but even if you're like, actually, we can't do that in the library, it shouldn't prevent you from having a manga section at all, because there are many much shorter series that you can include, and many series that are less kind of like action adventure, anime, TV brand series, and more author focused. That's one thing to say. Another thing to say is that I was actually recently talking to some different librarians about this. And one thing that they said was they found during COVID just how much manga that they had, because it came back to the library. And they were like, oh, whoops, like, where do we put this on the shelf? Now that it's all back here, we don't have room for it. But on a regular basis, just as far as keeping it in the library, it wasn't so much a problem, because the books were checked out all the time. And at the point when you started getting all of the books back on your shelf and they didn't get checked out, that's time to weed that series from the collection.
That's a very, very, very clever. I quite like that as a response. So shall we move on?
Yeah. Okay. Next, we have another category that I love, which is chapter book graphic novels. And there's more and more of these being published. This is just the name I'm giving the category of graphic novels for readers who are reading the next thing up from picture books. So, kindergarten, elementary school, short books, lots of pictures. This is an interesting space. It's one that's growing because publishers are publishing more and more into it. And some bookstores, some libraries I'm talking to are creating a separate kids chapter book graphic novel section for those early readers to distinguish these books, which are often 80 pages long, from more middle grade work, which is something that is going to be on the next slide. So you can kind of see these books in the middle grade space are pretty different from the chapter book level, which is more like Amelia Bedelia or that sort of age. Middle grade is the most popular age category in graphic novels. It's selling extremely well. And Snapdragon is one of my favorite middle grade graphic novels of all time. I think Cat Lay is phenomenal and should make as many more middle grade graphic novels as possible. So this is just an area where these books are flying off the shelves. You have very commercial series that are things like Dogman and Investigators, from to more like quiet and contemplative and autobio books, authors like Raina Telgemeier, Vera Brosgol. And there's just so much that's really great that's happening in this space.
We're almost out of time, so I must ask you to touch on nonfiction, which I know you have coming, even if it is not the next slide.
Indeed. Okay. YA graphic novels is the next slide. They're also very good. You can see many of them here. Also a growing category. And nonfiction, which is also a growing space in graphic novels. I would say it's growing more slowly than the other categories that we've shared. But you've got March here, you've got authors like Jim Ottaviani and Abby Howard, I think I put a Nathan Hale graphic novel on here because that series is, so good and just like seemingly beloved of librarians everywhere, as it should be. I think nonfiction and graphic novels are this great combination because there's so many interesting concepts or historical events that it's easier to understand if there is a visual involved in it. And just graphic novels are an amazing way to do that.
As an author, it saves you having to write any description, and it actually does allow you to deal with very sophisticated concepts in an extremely approachable fashion. I think just a great area that I hope does continue to grow. So we just got a praise for First Seconds science comics. I think Connie's been keeping us really on task, and I think we're just about up to Q&A. And I don't know if there's a last slide that you would like to show, Gina,
Oh, this
before
is the
we
last slide.
exit. Okay, so good. So just to lead the questions, Joyce asked a question about when you showed the spread of the many independents, and she asked about not just ordering from aggregators, but needing to order in other ways.
Yeah, so some of the indie publishers have distribution through places like Consortium or through Ingram. But in fact, there are many kind of those like micro indie presses that that don't, and if you're going for the like, these people have been around for 25 years, they're winning the National Book Award, like those people have distribution. But yeah, a lot of other people who are publishing, their distribution is online, on Kickstarter, at conventions, or from direct ordering. I've talked to some of these publishers about like how and why that works, and just the cost of going from like a two-person business where you do it yourself to being a two-person business where you're hiring a large distributor like Consortium or Ingram to do distribution and fulfillment for you can just be like crippling to your operating costs, and then you can't have a publishing company anymore. So that means there are these great publishers who are making amazing books and that don't necessarily get as much of a readership as they could.
So we
Thank
have
you, Gina.
another.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I see John Andrews has his hand up for a question.
Hi, thank you. How do I phrase? Do you think the push specifically in the comic side of it, superhero side, do you think the push to either recast or to refocus protagonists into previously marginalized people, women, people of color, etc., has had a corrosive effect on the core market for comic books in the past? Like, if we look at all these adaptations that Disney did of beloved superheroes, and they all bombed. I mean, like Falcon and the Winter Soldier is tragic. Like Hawkeye is awful. Like all of these beloved characters that people are rejecting. Is that actually happening, or is that just a perception in the market? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an interesting question. As a person who did not grow up reading superhero comics, and as a queer person, I really appreciate that the superhero publishers are looking at their characters and trying to, and their I guess it's brands, but like I don't know what it means when it's what the thing is to have like the Batman signal, but like the Bat family, I guess, and be like, okay, what can we do with the Bat family? I think that they have the challenge of having a staff that is mostly older, straight, and white, so that they don't necessarily in-house have the understanding of the populations that they're writing for. I think they have the challenge of having the first distribution network of comic stores, which are people who are very tied to a single brand loyalty and can be hesitant about picking up something new. You know, if you have your pull list and you're like, okay, I'm gonna get, you know, Batman and Superman, and then they're like, there's a new series, maybe you're not gonna pick that up in the same way. You know, so I think that's complicated. And I mean, just building a character takes a while. And I think right now, and not just in superhero comics, and in publishing everywhere, there's very much a push for things to succeed instantly. But if you're going to be publishing a new character where your main market is probably in the bookstore or the library, actually, and you're not going to even collect a trade paperback of that book for, you know, 6 to 8 months after the first issue comes out, and then you cancel it after 2 years, which is, you know, this book has had 8 months in the bookstore, like that is not the kind of robust support that building a new character and supporting them in the marketplace needs to achieve long-term success.
So
In
would
my
it-
I have some more thoughts about this, but I think we have to, if we have time, I'll come back to. But I think I would like to, there's another question that's come, and then an area I'd like Gina to talk about. The question that's come is, how do you get published?
Yeah, so this is a complicated question, and it is more complicated now because we've been having a global pandemic for a few years. You know, I mean, okay, so you saw that chart of publishers. There's many publishers out there. There are many publishers who are doing different things. You know, doing hopefully the kind of work that's in your heart that you really want to do lines up with one or more, hopefully more, of the publishers out there and their kind of aesthetic and taste. Sometimes that's not the case. Comics has a pretty robust self-publishing industry also of web comics and you know, just micro presses, distribution at conventions, all of that sort of thing. You know, if you are an author who wants to get published, you know, there's not kind of one true route. You know, write up a pitch, send it to agents, send it to publishers, and see how it goes. There are a number of schools who both have you know, continuing education or summer education, or also just like full-time comics degrees that can help you hone your skills. If what you're saying is, I want to be a cartoonist and I need a place to start, rather than if you're at the point where you're like, I have a book that I want to tell people about.
I think there's a lot of, I think it's a complicated question because people may be at many different starting points. Writing starting points, illustration starting points. And so my feeling is that I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. It depends where the individual is in his, her, their creative process and achievement, which is the same if you were writing just a regular text book that's just straight words. I wanted to get on to, actually, Kellyanne had a question, which we can get back to, but let's see, what was that? How can a librarian find out about graphic novel presses that may not be, for example, handled by B&T or someone like that?
Yeah, so what I would recommend here is if there is an comics art festival that is in your location, so like SPX in DC, MICE in Boston, CXC in Columbus, there's one in Minneapolis, Staple in Austin, that you go to it and you see how many different comics publishers, small comics publishers that you can meet. If you don't have one of those in your backyard, they all have exhibitor lists online, so it's easy just to go through them, and all the things that are, companies and not people, you can look them up and check them out.
So a question I wanted to pitch to you, if any of our students are interested in themselves in publishing, not in publishing their graphic novel, but in working in publishing as you did, what would you suggest for any of them in graphic
Yeah.
novel publishing?
So getting into publishing is complicated. It is a very popular job, and it's the sort of space that's like academia, where kind of entry-level jobs can have hundreds of applicants. So, a lot of people I know who are interested in getting into publishing and trying to do it become a little frustrated, because it could take like 2 years of applying to jobs before you get something. So that said, once you've gotten that job, it's pretty easy to kind of stay in and move around. So that's kind of a bonus. I would say that people who have library degrees have a shot specifically at getting a library marketing sort of job. And that space is always excited to have people with MLSs or MLISs applying, who have that knowledge of librarianship that they can bring to it. And publishing is awesome. And if another good way to start on this is the same advice I just gave about getting to know publishers, is, going to conventions, say hi to people. I think like doing as many things as possible to, make your resume really shine. If you can be, reviewing books for a trade publication, or, doing consulting for people, or kind of any of the many things that you could be doing, volunteering for an industry organization. All of that kind of gives you a little bit of a boost up.
I think that
I'm going to jump in right here.
Yeah.
Actually, sorry, Mark, because we're
No
right at
worries.
the top of the hour. And so we're going to go ahead and end our formal, look, I'm going to do it. This is how we end our formal session. So just wanted to say thank you so much, Gina, for your time this evening, and for Mark, and for all of you for showing up on a Wednesday night to share some time with us in the graphic novel spaces. Fascinating. So for those of you who need to leave right now, thank you again. There will be a video of this again posted to the MI Colloquium or MI playlist on the RUCOM YouTube channel, and also to my students. I'm really looking forward to seeing what your reflections are all about. So with that, I bid you adieu, and we'll go ahead, and Gina and Mark have agreed to stay on for a few more minutes after the hour to go ahead and continue a little bit with this incredible dialogue and take some questions. So thanks very much.
Sure, I'm happy to take more questions. I did have some more thoughts about John's comment or question about the, which is that I think fandom of certain kinds of comics can be very insular and intense. People can have very strong feelings that they can express very directly. And I think that can turn into kind of, collective rumor and ire. Oh, you diversity people, you're ruining good things. And I think that is to some extent a description of a kind of, a sociology of a space. How that, the other thing is, I do think it, having worked in publishing for many years, it's very possible for publishers to be well-intentioned and clumsy. That is to say, you can say, oh, we'll be diverse. Now we have a diverse comic. That doesn't mean you have a well thought through, well developed, well created diverse comic, it means you've checked the box. And so I think there's a difference between saying, is it a good idea to have superheroes and their families and their plot lines that are more reflective of a broader sense of who we are, is different from saying, was it well done? And was it done with the kind of care and passion and understanding and depth that may have been in a long-standing character? I mean, it's like, how many bad, MCU movies are there? And
Tons. Yeah, tons.
and so that's not because of diversity. That's because someone just had a checkbook and said everybody will come if it's an MCU movie. And so I think there's a danger in saying the issue is diversity, as opposed to saying the issue is execution. What's been done well, and yeah. Anyway.
I think from like a fan perspective, and I love talking.
But it's a
about,
rich discussion.
it's just like, the Falcon, the Winter Soldier, the television show, like Falcon is a canonically Black character, right? He's introduced in the 1970s. He is beloved. He's played very well in all of the movies, and now he's shoehorned into Captain America because Marvel decided that we needed a Black Captain America. And the hell with Falcon, what do we care about him? And it just feels like a cash grab. And that's why I think you're going to see a lot of fans exiting the space. I really do. I'm not surprised to find that superheroes are not popular in the graphic novel space. I say good riddance. I'd rather read a nonfiction. I would rather read Dog and Taco with my kid than I would. And I can't believe I'm at that point where I'm saying this way, but I just don't care about superheroes anymore. And I want to do something else. I think, and just as a final point, I think that's why you're seeing things like The Boys or Invincible on Amazon, these critiques on superhero culture. They do very well. I love The Boys. I think it's great.
But I would say the issue isn't, to me, diversity. The issue is somebody trying to figure out a cash solution to something as opposed to an organic solution or a deeply considered solution. And that isn't, it could be that they decided that every character should be purple. I mean, in other words, it's not that, it's that someone, they said, a camel is a horse made by a committee. So there's a committee that got together and said, we need more Black, and anyway, Laura has her hand up, but an interesting discussion.
Hi, yeah. So I was just reflecting a little bit. I was wondering, Gina, you didn't get a chance to show us the line graph, and you skipped by it so fast. I was wondering if it would be okay if we get Wosi. Partly because I was thinking about this conversation and just the changing demographics of readership. I didn't know if that's what it was about, but I thought it looked interesting.
It is. Sorry. It is not, but I can nonetheless show it to you. It is less about readership and more about audience categories and sales last year. Which is just to say, these are really nice numbers. Like total comics and graphic novels are way up in 2021. Manga has been increasing sales in a huge, huge way. Kids, adult, YA, like all of the spaces of graphic novels are growing. And to put this in context, you have on the side, plus 90%, plus 209%. Books in general are usually a 2 to 3% growth business. So, you look at these numbers and you just see like comics are way outpacing the market in how much they've been selling. And, that's reflected in the fact that schools and libraries and bookstores are, getting sections and stocking them. But clearly with that kind of growth, there's just more interest and more opportunity in getting more people involved.
Was that all English language?
This is the US market, and this is BookScan. So this is sales through the register. This doesn't reflect library sales, school sales. It only reflects like people actually spending money to pay for these books.
Again, forgive
that
my
would-
naivete, but are graphic novels often translated into other languages?
They're also translated into English from other languages.
Yeah,
There's
right.
very lively graphic novelness all over the world. Well, not all over the world, but in
Mhm.
several parts of the world.
Mhm.
Yeah, and there is a translation market. There are lots of graphic novels published in a lot in Japan. You saw the number
Right,
there.
that's where I always, think of it.
But also, I mean, France is a huge graphic novel too. France is a huge graphic novel market too. So yeah, there's a lot of translation that's happening.
So there were a couple of people brought up the question, are superheroes sales declining, or are they declining relative to the growth of other sectors? So are there actually fewer superhero comics, let's call it, sold, or is it just they're not keeping pace with the growth of other areas?
Yeah, well, so they are not keeping pace with the other areas, to be sure. And okay, like what information do I have about this?
I have
sorry,
none. So
superheroes aren't as much my area as kids graphic novels as independent graphic novels. So I am my guess is that they are going down slightly, but that's just a guess.
We would have to look at sales in comic book store, like there are different distribution channels, etc.
Yeah, and the place to go for that information is the website ICV2, who does a lot of metrics specifically about comic stores and comic store sales. And then there's also this, I don't know if they're a data aggregate, it's this company, they're called Comicron, that does an annual report that's focused on the pamphlet comics industry rather than the graphic novel industry. And I don't know if they specifically call out superheroes, but it is that pamphlet space rather than the ISBN spine sort of space.
Well, that was interesting. I think several people have commented, and I think it's true that what graphic novels have moved into and are now offering us are these different kinds of narratives and stories. There's memoir, there's different kinds of, and that has sort of changed what the whole space kind of feels like. Yeah. So other questions, friends, folks?
Sean has had a number of really interesting comments. Sean, do you want to take yourself off of mute and ask question or offer your comment about your thoughts about where the medium has turned to? I think that's really good. Maybe not. Okay. Well, so what Sean said was that the medium has moved towards more original stories. And it seems to me, again, not an expert in this, is that it is the graphic format is just more accessible for more people.
Yeah, and I mean, also here's the thing. The fact that superheroes have had this dominance in the market was caused by an artificial event. It happened because there were all sorts of comics being published in pamphlet form in the US. And then a guy who's a psychologist named Frederick Wertham published this book called Seduction of the Innocent. And it took the country by storm. People were like, the thesis of this book was that comics are bad for kids. And it elevated itself to hearings in Congress. It was this huge deal all over the place. And comics publishers mutually agreed to have this system called the Comics Code Authority, which meant that they would only publish certain kinds of content, which was, stuff that was generally broadly accessible, but also had lots of rules like no vampires and blood, and which, you know, meant you couldn't do a lot of horror comics, or good has to always win, which meant that a lot of the, you know, adult literary kind of sophisticated story where you didn't necessarily have a hero who was, you know, defeating the monster to save the day wasn't allowed on the newsstand. So the market, which, you know, this was in the 50s, but, you know, so the market was all, which was all of these different things, kind of narrowed down to funny animals and superhero comics and Betty and Veronica and Archie. And then in the 90s, early 2000s, publishers were finally like, actually, we're not going to do this anymore. Like, we're not going to submit all of our books to the Comics Code Authority and make sure that the hero is winning in all of the stories and that no one has turned into a vampire. Like, we're gonna publish all sorts of books that are about all sorts of things with complexity. So that, you know, I feel that what has been happening in the past 20 years, in the past, you know, since Mouse won the Pulitzer in 1986, is that the market has been taking the stride and making an adjustment, hopefully back to, no, I don't know if it's back to, but kind of evolving in a more 360 sort of way, since the arrested growth of Wortham in the 50s.
That was a beautiful, beautiful historical description. I'm getting a little bit of nudge again from the side and asked if we wanted to make some final comments. I think the one final comment I wanted to make was, one student said, oh, could we have this again? And I would say, Gina, you have just so much to say about an area that everyone wants to talk about. It's so rich. I think we see that and feel that, my only feeling is someday I hope we can get you again, or we'll have to come up to Boston and see you there.
Come to the Boston Book Festival, everyone. I mean, it's not until October, so we have plenty of time, though it is, you know, snowing here because it is Boston.
And you tweet you tweet a lot of book reviews and your thoughts about books.
Yeah, I mean, I read a lot, and I mostly tweet about reading things, not necessarily very eloquently, but if you want to know what I'm reading, you can follow me on Twitter at _Gina Gagliano.
So Gina, any final thoughts beyond that? We will rush to follow you, and you tell us what the Boston Book Festival is as a final.
Oh, John did have a quick question, I think, before we wrap up. John, did you want to ask your question real quick?
No, I was just using the applaud emoji.
Oh, okay. You know, this is what we do now in Zoom. You wave your hands for applause.
No, Gina, I didn't say when. Someone asked what. So define.
And when. What and when is the Boston Book Festival? Give us a plug.
The Book Festival is the largest book festival in New England. It is, I mean, if we're in a comics paradigm, it's like a Comic-Con except for books in general, including comics. So it has exhibitors, it has authors, it has programs, it has signings, it has all sorts of events. So yeah, that is the book festival in a nutshell sort of description.
And it's in October.
Yep.
Fantastic. Again, we'd like to offer you a chance to offer your last comments.
Yeah, well, thank you all for coming out and hearing about graphic novels, which are one of my favorite ways to read. And I so appreciate how there's just more enthusiasm and excitement and education in the library space to go out there and make that a reality for kids everywhere. I feel that this is my favorite hobby horse. So I feel that people in America should read more. Looking at global reading rates, I think that America does not have a high enough one, that more people should be reading. And graphic novels with the visual element is a way to get people who may not enjoy reading prose, or who have a hesitation about reading prose, aren't comfortable with that, or who incline more visually into reading books in a different way. And I think with our reading rate, we need to embrace all of the ways to get people to read. And my hope is that graphic novels can be an entree for all of those readers into how all sorts of reading is great, but especially graphic novels because they're awesome.
I'm
You're
with you.
here.
I totally agree. And we just saw today that the studies are showing pandemic caused even further declines in especially elementary reading rates. And so I think absolutely we have to use all tools. And this is such a great tool that
Great
is
point.
in its efflorescence. So everybody go out and be the apostles of the efflorescence. And thank you, Gina.
Well said, both of you. Thank you again, Gina, for taking some time out of your obviously incredibly busy schedule to share your expertise with us. And Mark, thank you for bringing Gina to our colloquium stage. So with that, we're going to go ahead and say goodnight for real. And we will see you, I guess, April 12th is our next colloquium, which is going to be, if you say data science one more time, and then I don't know what they're going to do about it. So anyway, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
By the way, this is one of the best attended colloquiums we've had for online.
Thank you,
Amelia, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say thank you to Gina. I read an article about you like before this, and I saw that like Alex Segura commented, and I was